Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Rachel Smith and I'm an editor here at Flash Frontier. And today I have the great pleasure of being joined by creatives from Aotearoa and across the world for Flash Frontier's new Roundtable series. And this is held in connection with the University of Otago Centre for Medical Humanities. So we have themed issues at Flash Frontier, and our March themed issue is Endings, he mutunga. And this roundtable is looking in restoration and renewal. So welcome all. So I thought I'll start with some introductions. We have full introduction bios for all of our guests available on the website as well. And then we'll jump into our conversation. And if you can give a wave as I intro you too, that would be great. So we'll start off with Noa von Bassewitz, who is an artist and writer with German, Maori and Scottish strands in her whakapapa. Her art making encompasses ink, print, soft sculpture with air, film, audio and atmospheric immersions. She is guided by the notion that storytelling in any medium carries the potential for healing humanity by building reconnection. She has recently received her MFA from Massey University and is currently a student of creative writing at Victoria University. And I strongly recommend checking out her Instagram page as well, just so you can see some of her amazing work on there. Next up, we have Freeman, who is joining us from the United States. Rue is a Sri Lankan and American writer, poet and activist whose work appears internationally in English and in translation. She is an award-winning author of books of essays, short stories and novels, and the editor of the anthology Extraordinary Rendition, American Writers on Palestine 2015. She writes for the UK Guardian, the New York Times and the Boston Globe and teaches creative writing in the US and abroad. And I really enjoyed on your website, Rue, that you describe yourself as a writer and an activist and the intertwining of these two important parts. And so also from Aotearoa, we have Leah. So Leah Crisp is a master's student at the University of Auckland, specialising in heritage conservation. A keen and passionate advocate for Aotearoa's heritage, she joined her first trust board for a heritage property at the age of 18. Leah moved to Auckland in 2025 to undertake her Masters in Heritage Conservation, majoring in Built Heritage, and was a 2025 Coupe Leadership Scholar. In her spare time, she enjoys photography, especially of heritage buildings, visiting heritage buildings, and going on walks around Auckland's many beautiful maunga. And joining us from the Netherlands, we have Sarp Sozdinler. So a Turkish writer, Sarp has been published in Electric Literature, Wigleaf, Pithead Chapel and Masters Review, among other journals. His stories have been selected as finalists for international prizes and selected or nominated for several anthologies, including the Push Cup Prize, Best Small Fictions and Best Microfiction. And he edits the literary journal, The Bulb Region, when he's not working on his first novel. And congratulations, Sarp, on your recent second placing in the Bath Flash Fiction competition. Very exciting.
Thank you, Rachel.
And lastly, from Aotearoa, we have Joshua Prendeville. Is a film director and writer from New Zealand, Aotearoa. His first feature film, In Passing, was released internationally in 2020, and his documentary, The House Within, examining the life and work of New Zealand author Dame Fiona Kidman, was shown at the New Zealand International Film Festival in 2024 and in cinemas last year. He is currently in development of two scripted projects, a miniseries adaptation of Fiona Kidman's award-winning novel, This Mortal Boy, and an original screenplay that you're co-writing with acclaimed author Pip Adam. What a lineup. Yeah, I'm so excited to have you all here today. It's going to be a great conversation with all these different creative minds. So to start us off, I've got a broad question and then we'll just go from there and see where our conversation flows. So thinking of restoration and renewal, how does this idea or does this idea inform your work? And whether that is in writing, short fiction or longer fiction, art in all its forms, filmmaking, and the actual practicalities of physical restoration. And I wondered if, Rue, would you like to start us off? Yeah. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, I didn't catch the accent that it was me.
Oh, that's okay.
You know, I've been thinking about it, and when you're asking the question live like this, I think yes. One of the things you said that I describe myself as a writer and an activist, and one of the things I like to emphasize is that I'm not two different people at any time. I'm always the same person wherever I find myself. So the activism is very much a part of the writing, and vice versa. I think that means that anything that I write, anything that I create is informed by this idea of responding to the world as it is. And when I think about restoration, the restore, I like etymologies and the fact that you're actually bringing something back in some ways. And I think the word that I would describe myself as one of the words that I think would really describe me as a person and a writer is confronting. I confront things. So from the Latin with, and front, which is face. Confrontation is often, seen as being rude or, impolite, sort of antagonistic. And I don't think that that is the case. I think that when we confront things, we are actually rebuilding and restoring some truth that is out of kilter, or that's the goal. Even from something very small to something very large. So as an example, I can say uh, I was in Nazaré, Portugal. I don't know, it's a surfing town. Maybe you guys are aware of it. The name Nazaré can be traced back to Nazareth, which is a Palestinian name, Al Nazira. So that's the background to that name. So I remember being in a tour group, and these people, the guide was talking about the monk who brought a statue of the Virgin Mary to Nazareth, and that's where that name came from. But then she refers instead to a historical connection to Jewish immigration, which is not true. And most people would just say, okay, it's a tour group, just shut up. I can't shut up. And I think that act of saying, well, this is not actually correct because historically this is the actual thing, is for me the act of restoring a truth. So I think a lot of the creative work that I do stems from that same urge. I just gave you a kind of a small example of normal life, but it's the same in the creative work as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I wondered, Leah, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about your work, which comes at restoration from quite a different viewpoint, from a writing type way. So what has drawn you to the work of restoration? And yeah, what do you like so much about it? Tell us, I don't know anything about it. Tell us about what you do.
Um, well, at the moment, it's still very much in that kind of student phase of life. I would love to, restore as many heritage buildings as I can further down the line. But definitely at the moment, it's kind of that absorbing everything that I can from all of these kind of lecturers and tutors. But restoration is really kind of at the heart of, I guess, yeah, everything that I'm doing and everything that I want to do. In the heritage building world, restoration is a very loaded term. It kind of has its links to kind of previous centuries where they would rebuild kind of a building exactly how it was a couple of hundred years ago, but maybe use some kind of conjecture to imagine what it should have been rather than what it could have been. And so kind of conservation is the word that heritage building professionals, I guess, prefer nowadays. But I think restoration at its heart still has an important meaning for heritage building professionals because it's more the restoration of the building's relationship with the community. And that's a lot of the work that I'm doing with some of the trust boards and organizations I'm on here. Because a lot of these buildings and a lot of these kind of organizations are really struggling to kind of connect the people with it again. The house that I'm on a trust board for in Palmerston North, tiny little Palmerston North, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, had gone through a period of being dilapidated for about kind of 30 years and then bought by the council for kind of $1 to then renovate it into this massive events and function kind of venue. And so it's all about kind of making sure that the community remembers that it's still there and it's such a living piece of our history down there. Because there are so many people in the Palmerston North, the 80,000 people in Palmerston North, there is a proportion of them that actually don't know that this massive Category 1 heritage house exists, and it's such a gorgeous space that people can use as well. So restoration, that relationship between the buildings and the community, and that's something that I'm looking to pursue in my kind of future work.
And I see a really nice alignment between the restoration of the connection to community and place and people and story as well. Yeah, and going back to renewing and restoring, I guess, our understandings of things. Was there anyone else who wanted to jump in with about how restoration and renewal as an idea informed your work?
I had a question.
Yeah.
For Leah.
Yeah.
So when you talk about restoration, is it what I'm getting, because I'm not familiar with, what are the codes and all of this stuff in where you are from. You said that you're concerned about the building's relationship to community. So is it sort of restoring things so they're not just artifacts of the past and you're just visiting it as a historical space, but also its usage presently? Is that the way that you're thinking about it?
I think that's absolutely a lovely way to put it. There are probably a lot of buildings in New Zealand, and I'm sure around the rest of the world, that, when they're kind of restored in the exact same state of what they were, and they've got the exact same furniture as what they were, they're very much kind of museums rather than kind of living buildings. And I think something that I find really important is that these buildings do continue to change and adapt as our society does, because otherwise we won't have a use for them, and that makes them really kind of dangerous in terms of, if we don't have a use for buildings, then the likelihood of them being demolished is far greater than them kind of surviving. And so I think that's kind of more what I was thinking. So you framed it a really nice way.
Noah, would you like to tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Certainly. So I suppose my take on restoration and renewal is my background is anthropology and art making, and I think for me, with the art making that I have been making for the last couple of years in terms of restoration, I think I started going on the project that I worked on for the last couple of years from a place of being quite overwhelmed and feeling heavy, in the sense that the world that we are currently going into and that we have created as human beings is one that I do not wish to gift in its current state to my children and future generations. And so I think my quest, both in art making and in storytelling and and as a human being, has been going, where are the narratives that actually allow us to restore our humanity and to actually find new ways of moving forward that challenge where we are now, in a sense similar but different to what you were saying, Rue, in that to confront what we consider normal, to confront what we consider traditional, to confront what we accept as the only way forward. And I think for me that has been sort of an unearthing. It's renewal, but it's also kind of like finding the old things and bringing them back up to the surface again, going, we have plastered on all of these different layers that I feel we could actually, it's like old skin now that we've kind of grown on top of ourselves as a culture, as societies around the world, that I'm going within my art making and storytelling now. It's like, how do we peel those layers back to allow for new things to grow? And similar to you also, Rue, in terms of looking at language, going, how do we want to actually, I love words which have because it is about that sort of, it is rediscovering, and there are so many beautiful aspects that come with rather than de. It's like there is that aspect of opening. So I think for me, yes, it is both discovery and rediscovery and finding new directions. For me, that's the renewal has been about that, going, I need to find ways I would like to move forward with joy, I suppose, perhaps. The long-winded.
No, that's lovely. I think in these topics, they are quite big themes, whether we look at them in the larger world view or in the more like intimate view. And they do open up to lots of ways of looking at things, which I think is really great. Joshua or Sarp, have you got anything you'd like to add into our conversation?
So I should have coughed before I unmuted myself. Yeah, no, everyone's got really great ideas. It's really kind of nice just sitting here talking. I almost feel like I want to mute my video as well and relax a bit. But no, it's hard. I think probably like most people here who spend a lot of time kind of thinking about art and thinking about these sorts of things, you inevitably spend a lot of time sort of in the past or in the future, sort of projecting or sort of reflecting on stuff. And there's a really great book by Adam Phillips, one of his many great books, called On Giving Up. And he kind of explores this idea that giving up is also not just a negative notion of like a sense of loss, but it's also about choosing something better and choosing something to fill that space that giving up allows. And so in terms of restoration and, renewal and moving forward, I think it's also about that. It's about, for me at least, giving up things that I no longer agree with and no longer feel that are important to carry forwards, and then kind of restoring those values or those kind of ideas that I think do have some kind of longevity or do have things that are worth taking into the future. And I think that's about, places but also about people. I think it's nice to champion people who feel like have some sort of message that's worth going forward with, and then also spend less time working with or collaborating or kind of championing people who you no longer agree with. I think that they're really big topics, so I'm trying to sort of like get into it without going too far in one direction, because it could very easily be political, it could easily be sociological, but I think
It's
I think
okay.
it's more
Go wherever you like.
I think it's about just a question of choice, really, and restoring things that you care about and making sure that you do that with a way of thinking about the way in which those things interact with everything else at the same time.
Yeah, and so were these ideas in your mind when you approached Dame Fiona Kidman about making her documentary?
Yeah, it was a really funny process. I read one of her novels and I was really touched by it, and then I sort of wrote to her saying that I loved the book and I'd love to talk to her about it, and I flew down to her house and we spent the day together, and I thought it'd be like a quick 20-minute meeting, as these things can be, but it was all day, and we sat across from each other and had tea after tea and just spent hours and hours talking about everything except for what I had planned to do. And I think what I discovered, or what I kind of renewed in myself, was just the sort of pleasure of conversation, the pleasure of meeting someone new. And I think that you can kind of get so caught up in the construction of your own work and the construction of your own methodologies that it's hard to leave the door open sometimes and see what kind of might walk in. And when I met Fiona, I just met someone I wanted to spend more time with, and I thought perhaps other people might share that feeling. I don't think I answered your question at all, but
no, you did. That's good. And I feel like from this documentary. So for those of you who don't know Fiona Kidman, she's one of New Zealand's most well-known writers, and is an amazing writer of novels and short fiction. And I feel like that your documentary has kind of added her to maybe a new audience, like renewed the understanding of her work as well in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Really, I think the kind of the sort of the irony, or at least the sort of like the kind of other angle that I'm coming from, because there's sort of about 50 years, I think, that separate Fiona and I. So we can sit on the same table and talk, but we're quite at different ends of the table in a way, and just in terms of our life experience and what we bring to a conversation. And she's written, as I'm sure you know, these kind of memoirs that happen every 10 years, but they haven't happened for quite a few years now. And I just felt that perhaps I could do the final chapter, or I could do that next one that perhaps she won't get around to writing. And it was just pleasure of spending some time in someone else's company, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really rejuvenating when you find that connection, that creative connection with someone in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sarp, did you want to tell us a bit about your work and how these ideas or if these ideas make their way into your writing? I've read a couple of your short stories recently, which are very gentle and beautiful and talk quite closely about relationships and relationships that change. So I guess the idea of renewal and restoration at a smaller, more intimate level.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there has been really some great answers throughout, and they also made me wonder in certain regards. When Rue was describing her own practice, the two sides of her practice, she said something that stuck in the back of my mind. She said, I often try not to describe myself as two different people, and I've come to realize that I actually feel the other way around, that writing becomes for me, a way of renewing myself, and not only on a personal scale, but also on a national scale, or at times on a global scale. And I think restoration and renewal are deeply tied to the act of writing in that sense, not always in the most obvious ways. Fiction in itself is a way of restoring reality, for a start, and it's a way of renewing the conditions of that reality, and returning them to their original state in a way. And I mean, it's a little bit of trying to explore what was previously an undercurrent, or emerging what was previously an undercurrent to the surface. And I think here all five of us just try different tools to try and make sense of it. And I mean, before coming here, actually, I had also realized that I didn't think about my practice in those terms. But your question earlier, Rachel, about whether the character comes first or a theme comes first, made me thinking. And I think, especially when it comes to fiction, and I'll try to more discuss about the domain of fiction, because that's what I feel I am more accustomed to, in a way, in my own practice. And I think it always starts with the character. This is where the friction stems from, and it's always a matter of skill. It's just at the end of the day, things really don't mean nothing by themselves. A tree or a house is nothing but of a picturesque quality unless they are being gazed upon, or interacted in a certain way. It's through that interaction that they acquire meaning or context, and it's through that context we reach the motivations, and it's those motivations that makes us make sense of the world that's surrounding us, of the story, of all those different realities that we create. And for me, writing helps me understand these dualities in a way. I come from a country of dualities. Speaking of dualities, I mean, I come from a country of polar opposites and hidden histories, oppressed histories. And going back to what Rue said earlier, I often feel like I'm carrying all these different personalities within me. I was traditionally I was traditionally trained as a designer, but have been working as a writer for so long. And it is all these different personalities is for me a way of trying to understand the world that's surrounding me, and that world is shifting, changing at an incredible pace, and I'm just trying to keep up through my own practice and my own sensibilities, and writing in that sense maybe offers a shift of, a shift in consciousness in a way, a renewed, a restored perception. So that's maybe how I can start this discussion on my end. Sorry for the very long answer, but I also found out certain things as I moved along, I think.
Oh, that's really great. And I like the idea of our creative practices restoring us and ourselves, which I feel like, well, I can relate to, and I'm sure probably everybody here can as well. Is there anyone who'd like to respond to anything that Sarp said there? Just jump in whenever you like, by the way. I had a question then for you, Roo, about you shared an excerpt, which will be, everyone can read online, which was from your essay Aftermath. And in it, you talked a little bit about the writing of Cormac McCarthy and the book The Road, which I personally found really terrifying, but I like the way that you flip it and say, actually, it's a story of hope. And this is a short quote from your essay. In the midst of the terrifying reality of a destroyed world, a father instills the most fundamentally significant thing that can be given to a child, goodness, which is another way of saying that the day is most assuredly terrifying, but that this is the chance to prove our true commitment to good. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about that beautiful statement, and I guess how that how you enact that through your activism and your writing.
I wish I could say I have it all down, Pat. I think it's an effort. It's an ongoing effort to respond in that fashion. And the essay, just for some context, was written in the aftermath of the last Trump election. And full disclosure, I did not vote for Kamala Harris. But the essay was about pushing for an eventuality which is terrifying, but can actually generate a certain kind of solidarity that did not exist before and would never come into being under the circumstances that existed at the time in the United States in particular. But of course, as we can see globally. So I think that that optimism that I feel and that I talk about there is that I believe very strongly in solidarity that is transnational, that's borderless. And as a very young person, not so long ago, I was writing my undergraduate thesis was about a transnational capitalist class that is lockstep and undivided. You think arms industry, think warmongers. There's no across borders, right? They have no disagreements, but are very much also in agreement about keeping another class of people divided among different ideologies and borders, and that those people that I call the ambit periphery, which exist everywhere in the world and has until this present moment not really found solidarity with one another. So for me, that's what I was looking at in that essay is I feel now come to a place where there's a merging of us, and it has come at great cost. And precisely because of that, I feel like it is not something that can be squandered or that we should let slip out of our hands. So that's my commitment. And so in terms of how to go about that, at a very personal level, I feel like I share my resources because all my resources that I have come from the work that I've done as an artist. And it's a product of my work. Whatever I have has come from that, and my family and my heritage, all of which people who raised me to be the way that I am in the world. And I find myself in places where I can connect people across genres, across industries, across borders. And it's a contribution that I can make, I think, to be aware of how we weave ourselves together and our work together to make something better. There's an essay that I wrote some other time about, everybody's heard this term, leap and the net will appear. Has everybody heard it, or is that just like something that I think everybody has heard? It doesn't matter. It's whatever. Leap and the net will appear. The other one I love is, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space, which I love. But anyway, leap and the net will appear. And I think that the reason you know the net will appear is if you participate in the creation of that net. And the creation of that net is what solidarity, I feel, brings into being. So I'll just stop there. I think that answered the question, I hope.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Does anyone like to add into any of that about solidarity and the sharing of knowledge and information and supporting each other creatively?
Can I briefly
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's sort of come up in a variety of people's comments, but I think there is this interesting moment in time now where sort of the dominant cultures that we are, participating in have become have actually locked so many people out of participation that there is this interesting moment now, I feel, where we're sort of reaching a kind of a very specific moment in time again, where yes, there is that feeling of needing to band together essentially to form something new, because what we have created does not serve the majority of people. And as it becomes more and more difficult to, pay for food, to pay for fuel, to pay for these things that allow us to participate in life, things like creative connections are actually the aspects that really sustain us in those moments. And I'm finding in my own sort of the networks of people in writing and art worlds that come together, there is this interesting sensation of hope is not the right word, but there is it's a tipping point. There's a friction and an excitement of going, we're getting very close to a point where something new needs to emerge. And it is drawing people together, as you were saying, Rue. There is this real need to find a new way to be drawn together, because we are getting locked out more and more by this kind of overclass of wealthy people who are doing things that are not wealthy people, wealthy corporations, for example, that we are no longer able to participate. And so it's time to start being coming up with creative new ways of actually engaging with the world. And I think that art and the arts are an incredibly important sustaining essence at this moment. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I was going to say that, I think that I definitely agree with you. And that I've been thinking lately how I think that, at least, again, for me, I feel like for a long time you work in a sort of vertical plane where you're very aware of what came before you and very aware of where you want to go and what you want to put into the world. And you kind of operate in this kind of like singular line that runs down. But recently, something happens and you have to stop. You have to kind of pause, or you kind of come to a kind of impasse you can't get over. And it can be a lot of things. It can be like having children, which is, a great one, to stop, tracks. And all of a sudden that line is no longer clear and it's no longer straight. And so you end up having to sort of operate on a different one. And the line that I feel like is becoming more valuable, perhaps for its lack previously, but the sort of horizontal plane where you take in what you're saying, Nora, is about taking in everyone that's on that same little line, and so it's operating in the same kind of space as you and the same time as you and stuff. And I feel like that's a really interesting and perhaps more productive way to go forwards, is that it's not about just where you've been and where you want to go in relation to, your parents or your lineage and where you want to go, but also about who's kind of sharing that space with you and who's kind of operating on similar things and what sort of collaborative kind of endeavors you can do. Because I think that, again, everyone has quite different practices, so it's hard to talk as if I'm saying something that we can all share. But there's what I do requires a lot of people, and you're sort of constantly talking and in dialogue with people, and you have to choose those people and choose who you want to do, and all these sorts of things. And the way that you kind of put that together or the way that I put that together, it's kind of interesting because it does, you have to think about these things. You have to think about who you want to work with and what careers are you kind of keeping forward. So it's not about choosing something that's contemporary in terms of its sort of fleeting relevance with other people. It's more about you personally, what authors do you want to work with, what stories do you think are worth telling, what kind of frameworks you want to, and also about what you put in front of the camera, what people, what faces, all that kind of stuff, and what crew and all these sorts of things. So I guess it's a long way of going back to the feeling of like having this kind of very kind of clear vertical line that I feel like consumed me for many, many years, being kind of cut in half by awareness of actually it's about discussing where we're at now and how we share that space where we're at now. And I think there's times that are better and there's times that are worse. And I think that the one we're in is definitely far from being the best of times. But it's the one we have. So we can't do much more than do our best.
Yeah, I really like that idea of like supporting each other and moving together. Yes, go for it, Rue.
I had a question. I mean, I just feel like I think that there's a generation, Gen Z. I mean, obviously, I am partial to them because I do have 3 daughters, and one of them, 2 of them at least, kind of fall in that category, and that are really resisting some of these older definitions and that have been passed down or have kind of dominated the landscape. And I don't know, Leah, if you are the youngest person in this group, but I'm guessing you are. So I would really love to hear, whether you have a perspective that might be, for me, it's a shift. It's a shift in how I think about things. But I'm wondering what your perspective might be about these kinds of connections that Joshua was talking about as well.
Oh, that's a very, very good question, and I feel like I'm going to fail quite miserably trying to answer it. Because while I am definitely in Gen Z, I feel like at heart, and sometimes in my mind, I'm like 70 years old. Because I'm a historian by trade. That was my undergraduate degree. And with all of these organizations that I'm on, I am the youngest person by far on all of them. And the kind of, I guess, the median age of a lot of the people on these organizations that I associate with are in that kind of 50 or 60 kind of age bracket as well. And so my mind has kind of more become something like that. But I think, I don't know, something that was very kind of standing out to me when Joshua was speaking earlier was that importance of kind of surrounding yourself with the right people. But also I think it's so important for me personally, not necessarily as a Gen Z, but for me personally, to surround yourself with all of the different kind of spectrum of ages as well. Because even, navigating this world, it's important to have kind of mentors that have those kind of previous generations of knowledge, or just in general, I think, rather than focusing kind of too much on one particular kind of age or group, kind of similar to houses, there's this amazing place north of Wellington in Sanson in New Zealand that has, and it's quite remarkable to me as a heritage building lover, houses that have been plopped on this kind of paddock with every single decade and era, just all in one. And I think it's kind of symbolic to me, especially of kind of people, and how it's so important to have that whole entire kind of diversity right there in front of me to kind of help me kind of understand and interpret the world, and to help other people as well. And I feel like this has not answered really the question at all, but that was definitely thought of.
No, it totally answers the question, because I was trying to think about the multi-generational kind of work, while also thinking about these are the not so meek who shall inherit the earth. So
thank you for that question, though. I think it was very good to challenge my kind of way of thinking and my answers. Yeah.
Sarp, I wonder if you wanted to talk to us a little bit about this idea of solidarity and choosing who you work with and how you work. And I'm thinking of, because you live in the Netherlands now, and I presume, did you grow up in Turkey?
Yes, I have. And
Yeah.
some of
And
the
how, like,
discussions that, oh, yeah, sorry, please go ahead,
I was
Ruth.
going to say, in changing place and meeting new people and living in new,
Mhm.
kind of ways. Yeah, how solidarity has helped you with that.
That's a good question. I think one of the very first things that I realized moving here with my wife and dog was some of the concepts that were being discussed here was entirely different from the set of things that is being discussed in the part of the world where I, came from. And it also made me realize that, and every day I'm more and more observing it, even after 6 years of moving, that different regions of the world invest their sense of urgency to different set of things. And what is being discussed as a need for solidarity for the Dutch people may be defined entirely differently from how, let's say, a Turkish group of artists or people, or a Palestinian group of artists or people may define it. And more and more often, I go back to the question where, although on a personal scale, I do everything I can to help all sorts of different groups of people, and I work toward that quite actively in my personal life. I can't come to understand why I don't utilize writing or any other practice that I've been doing toward that end. Maybe it's because that I feel that what I do feels obsolete to a certain extent, or redundant maybe. That I can't I feel that I cannot connect with writing or design in a way that it would make a real difference to some groups of people that are in dire need of help or solidarity, however you define it. But over the past few years, what I come to understand is, although maybe I cannot make an immediate impact through my writing, even to the people that are surrounding me on a daily basis, I can maybe use it in a way to get to know the right kind of people, to build right type of networks, which I think starts to feel like more urgent and more. I mean, I can measure the direct positive outcomes of building that kind of a network more than trying to mold my writing into a certain type of writing which doesn't work. I mean, I think I just come to terms with it, and I think it was also important for me to understand, to shift that discourse from a Western lens to a more not necessarily, I'm not going to define the part of the world where I came from as Eastern, because even doing that feels looking at things through a Western lens, because that dichotomy is also quite messed up in logic in my mind. But it's just that I'm trying to, I am going back to how Joshua described certain things. I think I'm trying to work out my mind and practice on a more horizontal basis, in a way that I see world more horizontally. Because even saying like things like West, East, creates certain kind of vertical hierarchies, which in the world of real people like us, I don't think, those types of boundaries really exist. So, even this event really proves us that in the end. So I'm just trying to be more cautious, more in the moment, more aware of certain things, in that sense. That then I'm really grateful these kinds of events also help me understand certain things So yeah, I think I can leave it at that at this moment. Thank you for asking, Rachel.
Thank you.
I had a response to that, this idea of horizontal thinking. I think that's it's interesting because I think it's a very feminine and has always been a very feminine way of being in the world, because I think the feminine experience politically, sociologically, has always had to be aware. There's an awareness of the plane on which you're operating at all times, and I think that's another thing that we're seeing in the world right now, is that shift toward and I'm not talking about in this gender. I'm talking very much in terms of these energies, feminine energies as well as masculine energies, of which all of which are important, but this way of thinking that is, like trees and their roots that talk to each other, as some of you might know, but this kind of research I think is also more apparent now than it has been in the past. So solidarity in some ways is also that. It's that kind of communication and seeing that that what surrounds us is very important, and engaging with what surrounds us is critical. Again, 3 daughters, so I mean I am slightly biased.
I also agree, and I think in terms of the idea of renewal or perhaps reinvention, a lot of my work has been about the idea of rebirth. So it is an aspect of rediscovering certain things which are already there. And I think for me, a lot of it has been coming back to the concept of feminine energies, not also very much not gendered feminine, but looking more, yes, at that collective, at that village, at that aspect of going. We have been living with narratives, I think, that don't serve. They don't serve men, they don't serve women, they don't serve children, they don't serve the environment. And I think it's actually a really interesting moment of sort of taking stock right now and going, if we listen deeply with our feet on the soil into the roots as human beings, and go, what do we need to actually flourish as human beings? And how are we going to do that? And I'm reiterating various people's sentiments going, I think it is about that reaching out and connecting in all directions. I went to an amazing talk on International Women's Day last year, and there's this beautiful speaker who I have right this very second forgotten her name, but she was saying it is so important, sort of dovetailing with the idea of that if you leap, there is the net, but also that if you are able to rise up, that also, as you were saying, Joshua, that you put the ladders back down so that you allow people to come back up with you, because I think we have this moment in time where we've seen what happens when you climb to the top, like Yertle the turtle. Hi, I can see everything, it's all mine, and you go, but actually it doesn't serve anyone really to be there. So I think we're at this very interesting moment of it's like almost like coming out of a deep sleep, going, hang on, why are we accepting that these are the ways that we do things? This is, that we are actually, it is a time of observing where we are, taking stock and gathering the good things to us, the good people, the good ideas, to go, this is what we want to build. Maybe we don't need that anymore. That's my...
Yeah, I was going to say, it was funny. I was at a screening the other day and I got stopped by a group of younger women, everybody in their 20s or 30s, and they wanted to come talk to me because they watched my first film on Apple the other day, and they were shocked that it was made by a man, and so they wanted to come talk to me, and I was sort of flattered, but then afterwards kind of quite bothered by it, that there's this sort of assumption that's to do with gender about the sorts of things that, not only the sorts of things that we gravitate towards, but the sorts of way we express them. And I think it's really interesting, and like to loop back around to a sort of slightly previous dialogue of kind of collaboration, that I think that this kind of vertical nature of like consuming work and kind of participating in work for a long time, I don't think brings up you know, the reflection of your own work into it, because you spend so long, you know, reading other books by people and watching other films by people. And I moved to Paris when I was 19, just by myself. It seemed like a good idea. And I spent 4 or 5 years just watching 4 or 5 films a day and living at a cinema. And that's all I did for a very, very long time. And it was only sort of after going through some things of life that kind of shake you out of that you realize that, like, there's only so much that monologue can take, you know, so much the sort of the interior sort of dialogue of like reflecting and kind of processing stuff. And at one point, you know, you have to talk with other people and you have to do other things. And so, and I think that there's this idea that sort of openness of dialogue, that kind of, as Rue was saying, that sort of being here now, there's this sort of, perhaps I'm misunderstanding about this, this feeling of like the femininity around it, because it seems to be like we have this image almost of sort of aunties sitting around a table, or this sort of having conversations about things that are perhaps banal, or sort of or kind of to do with sort of the domesticity of life, when in fact, like, that should be the way that we deal with anything. And I think that there's no shortage of incredible artists, people like Pedro Almodovar or Com Toybin, just to name a few men, who their kind of stories of when they got interested in storytelling or kind of interested in expressing themselves comes from these memories of sitting around tables with aunts or kind of having long conversations with mothers and things. And I just think that's also hopefully this generational shift of, you know, men talking and us not sort of defining an openness of dialogue as being something sort of inherently feminine or inherently non-masculine. That was like 2 different conversations going at once. I'm sorry. Yeah,
I just want to say, you reminded me of this movie. Sorry. No.
Please, let's talk about movies. Let's do it.
No, I was gonna. No, it was the movie. I just saw this movie about the Shakers. The
Testament of Anne.
The Testament of
the Testimony of
Anne.
Anne.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found really interesting is this idea, because it's there in I'm a Buddhist. I was born Buddhist, and Hinduism and many religions, that there is that there is a duality of people are not just one thing. They're not male or female. They're both. They're all. And in that, I was quite surprised to find that in the Christian doctrine, this idea that if you're made in the likeness of God, and if we're all made in the likeness of God, then God has to be both male and female. And so that was really that kind of is what I'm really getting at in terms of this feminine energy. It's not necessarily. I mean, the aunties are very important because they got Zoran Momdani to be the mayor of New York, but. It's beyond aunties. I think it's internally what we are. And also, I wanted to, please bear with me. I just wanted to say this because this panel, you know, every time you do something like a panel like this, or you get together with people, I don't know any of you. I don't know any of your work. So in order to prepare for this, I had to go look it up. And then when I was doing that, and I just want to read some things that I picked up from things that you had written. Sorry, Leah, I couldn't find something that you had done, but I know, you know, you're not in that same world of writing. So I saw in the Imperfect Pole, Noah, you had written the Imperfect Pole refers to also to the internal struggle between my desire to create art and consider it a valid life choice, and my pesky internal dialogue with its diatribe of denigrating whispers, pull and push. That, you know, so that I took that and it just totally spoke to a kind of a way of looking at things. And Joshua, in A Love Letter to Fiona, you write, I'm enamored by the contradictory nature of writers. Many have a thin veil of deception and reveal a tentative tipping from one to the other, right? And that again is so much describes how we might operate in the world. And Sarp, in Exit 8, you write, purgatory in this allegorical cinematic crop isn't portrayed so much as a place of moral bookkeeping as an endless landscape where characters try to keep their bearings long enough to remain themselves. And how beautifully put, right? These 3 things. This is language accessible, words accessible to all of us, but somehow each of you is writing about something in a way that is not something I could have written or would have written, but informs me and my practice and describes me and my practice in some way as well. So I think that that kind of engagement with art is important, and maybe not watching films for 5 years in Paris, but like this kind of or maybe even that, but it's just so it brings me joy, and I think joy is a huge part of renewal and restoration as well. I think Noah, you had one of your art's works is titled actually "Making Light Out of Serious Issues" or something. I'm probably getting this wrong, but I just love that, because I think that is also important, and this kind of conversation to me is part of restoration and renewal as well.
You're nails on heads or sprouting flowers. You've tied it all so beautifully together. It is. I think not to keep harping back to kind of community and connection all the time, but I think there is something in the air at this moment in time that is actually it is seeking that joy, it is seeking that connection, it is seeking that spark of going. We are actually all like trees. We are all actually feeding from the same earth, right? We are connected to the same earth. As you were saying, Sarp, east, west, these are all sort of Western ways of looking at the world. We are mammalian creatures that have evolved on this earth. We drink water, we breathe air. We need these really basic things to be alive, but then we also need these things that fill our hearts and fill our minds, which is this wonderful gift that we have as human beings, to be able to participate through words and art in other people's experience. And I think at this moment in time, we need that, because we need to remember. I think we've gone through a dark period with, COVID and all those sorts of things, where really, we felt, I think, possibly across the earth quite sort of squashed flat not in a nice, smooth way, but in a compressed way. And I think out of that, we're going, okay, what does it really mean to be alive and human? And it is about joy, and it is about connection, and it is about pleasure, because I was looking at the way that a politician the other day at an arts event was talking, and the language he was using, that was about battle and fight and kill. And I'm going, we're at an arts event. It is important to pick the language that we use. I don't want to battle and kill. I want to nurture and connect. And I think it is actually an important and protect. With you, Leah. Like there are histories that we have. We do not want to forget our histories, because if we forget our histories, we repeat them. Anyway, thank you, and I will bow out. But yes, it's very, very inspiring to be part of this panel with all of you and your amazing contributions.
Oh, thank you so much. Leah, I wondered if you had anything you wanted to add in about looking forward, and I guess, and as we come to the closing of our panel, about looking forward in restoration, and what the world looks like in restoration from your viewpoint.
That's a very, very good question. But the first thing that comes to mind when I kind of hear that is the Māori whakatauki that we have here in New Zealand, which is walking backwards into the future. And so, as you were saying, Noa, I think it's really important to also kind of keep an eye on what has happened kind of before us, and that whole entire kind of period of the last few generations, or the last few thousands of years, as we kind of move forward into the future, to making sure that we aren't making the same mistakes, and we aren't kind of repeating history in some of the things that we have done, which are not what we want to do going into the future. And so I think it's really important in that regard to kind of have that whole and carry that whole entire kind of continuum of history with us, to know that I don't know quite where I'm going with this. I think I lost it halfway through. But yeah, I think it's quite important to kind of, yeah, walk backwards into the future and know that, you know, we can be confident going forward, that we've got kind of all of the information kind of in front of us and kind of making our own way. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where I went with that, but.
No, we feel that, Leah. We feel the heart in that. It's beautiful. We're just coming to the end of our hour now, and I'd just like to thank you all so much. I wanted to close with this tiny little excerpt from this book, Where We Swim by Ingrid Horrocks, which is a collection of essays. And I was reading it this as I was preparing for the panel, and this little passage really spoke to me. How to imagine the scale of a single human life against the scale of water, how to balance the value of each, how to inhabit the simultaneity of haunting dread and everyday joy. From this space of persistent oscillation, might we come to intimate the urgency for collective action and collective care. See, I feel like collective action, solidarity, supporting each other, and collective care is a beautiful way to end our time together here today. So ngā mihi nui, thank you all so much for joining us and for this wonderful, heartfelt conversation. And to all our viewers as well who are watching this in our March issue. So thank you so much. Ka kite anō. See you again soon.
Thank you, and stay in touch.
Thank